Those of you in my Discord server know that one of my top 3 favorite anime is a rather odd pick, Re:Zero. Most people who have seen Re:Zero have come to the consensus that, yeah, among Isekai it's one of the best, but Isekai is a garbage genre, so it shouldn't be allowed to compete in the big leagues with other anime. I've enjoyed my fair share of Isekai, but honestly, I'm inclined to agree with that statement. Most of the shows within the genre are shallow with their plot and their characters, and worst of all, have the most awkward naming system that any writer could come up with. Seriously, who came up with the idea of naming an anime "I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world too"? Not to mention it felt like a power fantasy written by a 5-year-old. But Re:Zero is completely different. For one, it doesn't have a sentence that describes the entire shallow plot in its title. Wait, what do you mean it does? Anyways, it's far from shallow. In fact, I'm inclined to say that the depth of Re:Zero shattered the Isekai genre, and with Season 3 coming sometime soon, I think now is a great time to make sure that you are all able to understand the sheer complexity and beauty of Natsuki Subaru's journey in another world. What comes to your mind when you think of an Isekai protagonist? Likely answer is an average dude, usually a weeb or otaku, getting hit by a truck or stabbed by a mugger, and then the gods gracing him with an overpowered ability that makes their latent potential rise past any figure in the world's history. Also, they gain all the knowledge they'd ever need to survive in that world within the first 5 minutes, provided that they don't reincarnate with the knowledge immediately. But Subaru's different, okay? He's a shut-in otaku who gets teleported to another world after a truck passes him, and he is graced with immortality. Wait a minute. Jokes aside, yeah, the show starts off in a very similar manner to most isekai with the whole randomly appearing in another world business, but here's where things diverge. Subaru is literally helpless. He's able to communicate with people around him, but that's literally all he can do. He can't read or write, he's broke, he can't do magic. It's a far more accurate portrayal of what it would be like to be stranded in a new world for the first time. The great thing is that Subaru expects that this isekai thing would actually make him into a main character, and he maintains that assumption as he tries to find his way around the new world. He considers everything that's happening to be part of something like an anime storyline, and all of the things he faces are meant to build up his character into becoming the OP protagonist he was clearly isekai'd to be. Yeah, such an overpowered protagonist. Anyways, he gets saved by a girl, and then in natural shut-in otaku form he becomes a full-on simp for her, helping her on a quest to find an insignia that was stolen from her. He follows her into the slums, finds a store where Emilia and Subaru think the insignia is, and then Subaru dies. That is when he awakens the one perk he has of being an isekai protagonist. He doesn't die. When he dies, he gets tossed back in time with his memories and does it all over again, and does it as many times as he needs so that he can get a happy ending. Lame show, right? Absolutely no stakes. If somebody dies, Subaru can just kill himself and make sure that they don't die in the next round. What's the point of it? Well, I will tell you right now, Re:Zero is a show that isn't meant for people who watch exclusively action shonen. It's for people who enjoy shows like Death Note and Steins Gate. Now, I'm not saying you can't enjoy Re:Zero if you watch action shonen. I watch action shonen, I like the genre, but I also love Re:Zero. The reason why I say that people who like action shonen tend not to see Re:Zero in as bright of a light as I do is because their concept of stakes is very different than the concept presented through Re:Zero. A show like Naruto or My Hero Academia would present stakes in the form of grave danger towards the characters. They face the risk of death as they go into a fight, and it isn't exactly possible for them to not die after dying, well, usually. But in a show like Re:Zero, death isn't usually an issue. I say usually because of what happened in the beginning of Season 2 with Rem.
Who is Rem?
For real? Anyways, with death not being an issue, it's a matter of mental stakes, which, in the context of Re:Zero, is the idea that Subaru's mental strength would diminish over time as things started seeming more and more hopeless. And my god, this show is flawless when it comes to executing this idea. The concept itself is pretty simple. Dying is painful. It's literally the greatest amount of pain a person can feel. Subjecting yourself to that type of pain multiple times is grounds to drive a person insane. Yet out of sheer motivation to keep the people he loves in this world safe, he tosses himself into situations where he uses his life as a weapon to gain all the information necessary for a happy ending. Subaru has no strength. He learns one magic spell that blinds people temporarily at the cost of nearly destroying his magic gate, and the demonic creatures in this world known as mobbies are attracted to Subaru more than anyone else because he's got the return by death ability, so that makes him effective bait. Outside of that, I guess he's stronger than the average person, but he's far from superhuman. He's a normal kid, same age as me, gifted with a power that I personally would never want. As much as I'd like to think I'd do the same thing as Subaru in his situations, I know for a fact that my fear of death would overtake my will to be a hero, and that's an idea that Subaru grapples with constantly. To protect the smiles of the people close to him, how many times would he be willing to die? The answer is more complicated than a simple number because it can't be a number. Subaru's answer to this question changes throughout the series constantly. In Subaru's mind, being transported to another world was the best thing that could have ever happened to him. In Season 2, he showed that before he was isekai'd, he was a complete shut-in with basically no friends and no remarkable aspects whatsoever. Getting transported away from that world where he was living that useless life was finally his cue to start over and be somebody here. He implanted it into his mind that he needed to be the upbeat protagonist, the main character of the story, and he tosses himself into everything with that main character energy, even though this world clearly doesn't follow the same format as the stories he used to read in his world. Let's look at the Rosewall Mansion arc to see exactly what I mean by that. He died 4 times, each time accumulating more information about the different routes to his death, getting killed by Rem and getting killed by a puppy, and in his 5th life we see his psychology in full view. It's a perfect illustration of burnout syndrome and Subaru's mentality as a whole. During this round, he has 2 goals: to gain the trust of the people in the mansion so that they don't murder him, and defeat the puppy, which is actually demonically possessed. Oh wait, I forgot, in the show being demonically possessed is a good thing. Okay, it's a beast created by an evil witch or something. To gain the trust of the people around him, Subaru works himself like a madman around the mansion, pretending to be happy as he goes around frantically trying to make sure that he could do everything he can to gain everybody's trust. This life he can't fail, this life he doesn't want to lose anybody. He needs to keep the world on his shoulders so that everybody can grasp their ideal futures. He's very clearly burnt out by his 2nd day of this, and the only one that notices is Emilia, which brings us to one of the most emotional scenes in the anime. Subaru tries to pretend like everything's alright, but Emilia breaks through and Subaru's armor shatters with tears streaming down. Subaru's mentality each time he has to go through these loops is that he's the only one who can solve these issues. He's the protagonist who's here to gather all the information and synthesize it to form the ideal path. But he's not Superman, he can't even use basic magic, and that pressure often leads to an unfortunate outcome of pain. The pain is only compounded when he realizes that he's not able to tell anybody about the fact that he's died before, or about any of the alternate timelines he's lived in. Any natural human being would want, or rather need, somebody to confide in over something as traumatic as this, whether it's in the form of professional therapy or just a good friend that could help out. But Subaru was unable to have either, because if he told somebody about the hardships he faced, that person would die. He has to keep all of it bottled up inside, which is why in Season 2, when he's finally able to tell Echidna, the Witch of Greed, about how he's died, it was so emotional. I didn't realize it, but the pressure of not being able to tell anybody about something this important that was building up in Subaru was also transferring to us as the viewer. Subaru was making us feel for him, and that is because he's done something that no other isekai protagonist has been able to do: become a relatable human. You can list the all-time great isekai list that you have queued up. That time I got reincarnated as a slime. You think Rimuru, the guy who has basically infinite strength, can be related to? Nah. Mushoku Tensei? I'm concerned if you're able to relate to Rudius, you're probably going to have to go to jail sometime soon. Sword Art Online?
You serious?
Don't get me wrong, these are great shows, at least the first 2 are, but none of them are able to create that connection that Natsuki Subaru was able to create in episode 18, titled From Zero. This episode of ReZero was pure dialogue after the first 5 minutes. The rest of the episode there was no action, not even a scene change. It had 2 characters, Subaru and Rem, talking. Yet, despite that fact, Season 1 Episode 18 is probably the best episode of ReZero, with its competition being Season 2 Episode 4, when Subaru sees his parents for the first time since being isekai'd. Episode 18 displays Subaru doing something that, forget isekai protagonists, almost no characters do in fiction. It displays Subaru being actively self-aware about being too weak to carry the world on his shoulders. I've talked on and on in this video about how he's trying to be Superman despite his lack of strength, and how that's taking a negative toll, but this episode is him showing that he knows it's taking a negative toll, and he's taking all this pressure upon himself to make up for the fact that he's woefully incompetent in every other aspect. The only thing that can be of use to the people he cares for is his life, yet he keeps resetting, and every time he resets, he feels more and more helpless. To quote his speech,
"I have no strength, but I want it all. I have no knowledge, but all I do is dream. There's nothing I can do, but I struggle in vain like an idiot. The cost of my lifetime of laziness and all the wasteful habits I forged along the way just ends up killing both you and me." That's right. I have no character. Even when I thought I could go on living here, nothing changed about who I really am. Deep down inside, at the core of my heart, I'm just a small, cowardly, filthy piece of trash who's always worried about how they'll see me, how they'll accept or judge me, and nothing about me has changed!
Themes such as stoicism are presented here because through the first two arcs, Subaru has gone through countless, well, not countless, the first two arcs had like 8 deaths combined, I think, and then up to this point in the third arc, I think the total's 12 or something. I don't know, the point is, he's died a lot, and all for the sake of other people. Yes, he was basically worthless in his original life, and he knew he was worthless, but that mentality has followed him into this world as well. So no matter how hard he tried, no matter what he did to make sure he could change, which he already had done, he's still stuck with the idea that he has no character, no redeemable qualities, absolutely nothing positive. If you want to see an entire video just breaking down the dialogue in this episode, leave a comment down below with the word cookie along with any other comment you have. I've gotta get to the other points in this video, otherwise it'll end up being too long to edit. Anyways, we see after Rem gives basically the best motivational speech in anime and still somehow loses the fight for best girl anyways, Subaru evolves considerably as a person, being far more in control of his own actions, driven completely by logic rather than emotion. Actually, no, it's not right to say that he doesn't let emotion drive him because his emotion is his main motivating factor, but he's a lot more level-headed. For the rest of the season, we see that while he does utilize his return by death ability, he isn't quite as traumatized by it when he uses it. He doesn't run into things without planning ahead carefully anymore, and when things don't go according to plan, he's very careful about how he uses the information for the next round. Furthermore, he ceased to use it as a tool as well, only using it when he has absolutely no choice outside of dying, but he also doesn't fear it, if that makes any sense. For example, when Subaru gets taken over by Betelgeuse, he asks Julius to kill him so that he could have another go at it, and when he wakes up, he's completely level-headed about the facts and communicates them concisely with the soldiers around him. It's almost like how in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is a whiny brat for the first 2 movies, but then in Return of the Jedi, he's completely calm and in a state of mastery over his emotions and the Force. Subaru's gone to the point where he only dies on his own terms, and therefore doesn't get as traumatized, and that's how we see his character grow throughout Season 1. However, in Season 2, Subaru's character gets taken even beyond this level. Maintaining his newly acquired cool demeanor, he goes into Season 2, but right as it starts, things get out of hand. At the end of Season 1, Subaru splits off from Ren, but while he was gone, all memories of her were erased from everybody except Subaru, and she was put into a coma. Subaru immediately kills himself to reset and try to save Rem, but his save point got updated so he couldn't go back in time before Rem ended up like this. This brings back depressed Subaru, but it also combines with the new balanced version to create a new angle at his character. Before Rem died, Subaru was a lot more apprehensive about the idea of dying, so in his balanced state at the end of Season 1, he only died when he really had to. Now, however, he's gone back to a position where, while he's still thinking fairly logically, he's also gone back to using his death as a tool, and making sure that people could rely on it, especially after he met Echidna for the first time. He blames himself for the fact that his power couldn't be used to bring Rem back, so now he's using his power more and more, taking more pressure than before to make up for it. I think the biggest thing to take notice of is the fact that Subaru, while clearly taking a toll every time he dies, it's just stopped showing the toll. In an attempt to be selfless, he shut off his emotions to a major degree so that he can make sure that he's able to secure a happy ending. He's decided that he's the only one who needs to know hell as he runs headlong into danger, using his life as a tool. This mentality breaks him until he gets to the point where he reaches the final form we see him in the anime, fully in control. After meeting Echidna and the Witch of Envy, Subaru was brought to the realization that despite what he's pushed himself to believe because of Rem's coma, he's not alone. There are people around him that he can rely on to help him, and he doesn't have to be running off into his painful death to make them happy. Their happiness doesn't have to be at the cost of his happiness. Even if he doesn't have extraordinary powers outside of his ability to return by death, he still has strengths that he can utilize, and in his final life of the season, he shows it. He stops acting alone and uses everything that he can to his advantage, emotionally appealing to all the characters that need to be appealed to, and in the process, he realizes that all the good he's done was never in vain. All the people he's helped were willing to pay it back to him as well, even Otto, who in season 1 did this stupid stunt.
Natsuki, please. Please die.
Yeah, he had a redemption in his pursuit to help Subaru. Subaru's character progression throughout ReZero is monumental, not just for an isekai but for any anime. He goes through a journey, and unlike basic character development writing where it's just a straight line of the character going upwards, Subaru has his ups and downs. There are times when we want to yell at him for being an idiot, and there are times when we absolutely feel for him. He makes us feel helpless for his sake because Natsuki Subaru is a human, which is something that very few anime are able to portray as amazingly as ReZero. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Maybe you can leave a like, subscribe, maybe click on one of the end screens. I realized that my audio quality on 3 of my newer videos were really bad, but I was proud of the scripts, so I wanted to make sure they were watchable, so I'm redoing them. Anyways, thanks for watching till the end. Bye.